Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar, You Can't Travel, but Your Products Can, Shipping and Logistics During a Pandemic. This online event is brought to you this morning by the MAPIT Alliance, or the Maryland Partners in International Trade. And I'm Rebecca Bellinger, the Executive Director of the Center for Global Business at the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, College Park. And I will be serving as the moderator this morning. On our agenda today are three main points. First, we'll look to the Port of Baltimore for an overview of what's coming in and going out of the harbor. Then we'll turn to a trusted local freight forwarder and logistics partner for another view on logistics challenges and how you can overcome them. Finally, we'll hear from another Maryland company on their experiences in this challenging environment, and they'll act more or less as a case study for us. At the end, we'll connect you with resources in the state that you can access to help you overcome any shipping or logistics challenges that you might be facing before we then turn to questions. I would like to take a minute to remind you all of a few things to help us move very smoothly through our agenda this morning. First, this webinar is being recorded. It will be made publicly available via our websites and emailed out to all participants afterwards for future viewing. Second, we will handle questions via the chat function. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to send your questions to everyone so that we can all see them. And then we'll try to get through as many as we can in the order in which they are received at the end of the presentation. Following the end of the presentation, you'll also see a pop-up window come up with a link that will take you to our 2-minute survey about this webinar. And the critical feedback that you provide will help us in planning and delivering future MAPIT webinars for you. I'd also like to remind everyone to please keep your cameras off and your microphones on mute throughout the presentation. And finally, if there are any technical difficulties on our end or on yours, we thank you in advance for your patience. And before we do move to the main content of our webinar this morning, I'd like to introduce the MAPIT Alliance, which is the host and sponsor for this morning's event. The MAPIT Alliance brings together key partners from industry, local, state, and federal government, and higher education in Maryland to raise awareness of existing export promotion programs, facilitate greater access to and usage of these resources, and build new collaborative, globally focused programs. You will hear from all 4 partners this morning: the USIAC, the Maryland Department of Commerce, the University of Maryland, and the District Export Council. And each will introduce their own unit before their part of the presentation. So while all 4 partners exist as separate entities that you may or may not have worked with separately already, we do come together in this alliance to share information, collaborate on programming for the benefit of companies in Maryland like yours, and connect you with the vast network of other entities that support international trade at the local, state, and federal levels. Today's webinar is content that we have developed to support one part of the export cycle or the export process. This graphic that you see before you is a tool developed by MAPIT, and it serves to help you understand the steps in exporting and to show you where you are in the process of exporting if today's content on logistics is very useful and relevant to your business. The previous MAPIT webinars on website globalization and digital marketing fit well into what we have identified as step 6. And today's content, again on logistics, takes us further in the process all the way to step 9. So you can see that there are many steps you already should have taken before you've gotten to the point that today's webinar picks up on. In future MAPIT webinars, we'll continue to reference this graphic. And with that, and without further ado, I would like to turn it over to my colleague at the Port of Baltimore, Rick Powers.
Good morning. So I'm going to give a 50,000-foot view of what we see happening at the port today. I know this webinar and this MAPIT group are basically export focused, but I'm going to give you a critical overview of what's happening since this COVID-19 breakout at the port, and I think it's useful information for whatever part of the international business you're in. So the Port of Baltimore is considered critical infrastructure by Homeland Security. The port has remained open throughout the COVID-19, the pandemic, keeping the supply chains open and keeping goods flowing and keeping supplies of PPEs and other medical items flowing through the area and the nation. When I say the port has remained open, most of it has remained open. There's one critical part of the port that didn't get reopened, didn't remain open. I'll get to that in a minute. That's the cruise port. So goods are flowing through the port. We play an essential part of the fight to fight COVID-19. You can imagine the amount of PPEs that are coming through, the amount of food that's coming through, and medical items. They're all coming through. Besides keeping the port open, we're also very worried and concerned about the health and welfare of the employees, co-workers, longshore men and women, and customers and service providers that work at and around the port. So there have been some requirements for social distancing, temperature check, hand washing. This is all reminded and constantly reminded people all the time to follow these very simple rules to hopefully keep a lid on this COVID-19 pandemic. So the one thing that has not remained open is the cruise terminal, and I think everybody has probably heard about that over the last few weeks. The cruise terminal was closed on March 18th by order of the governor. We did have one more ship come in after the 18th. That was to discharge passengers that had embarked out of Baltimore. They returned to Baltimore. No passengers were boarded on that vessel, and we've not had a vessel at the berth since. So far, we've lost 22 cruises and 3 ports of call. And we'll lose many more going forward. We lose about 7 a month every month if we don't open up again. But we understand what the story is with regard to COVID-19. The two lines at home port here, Royal Caribbean and Carnival, have not told us specifically when they expect to be back. They've given us some indications, late summer, early fall. All cruises, they're not ready yet, but they're not ready yet for a couple of reasons. One is that all cruise lines have been required by the CDC to come up with a plan and procedure to ensure the welfare of passengers and crew. These plans have all been submitted, and thus far, CDC hasn't responded to that. It hasn't given any response to any of those plans yet. It's going to be a while before we see cruises back in Baltimore. I think it's going to take, not before the fall. But for what it's worth, some indications are that their plans, the cruise lines will start cruising out of Florida for short cruises and build up some momentum, and then come up the coast up to Charleston, Baltimore, New York, as they get some momentum and some safety measures put in place. But as a anecdotal comment, we have been in touch with a European cruise line, and they said that their bookings for fourth quarter have never been stronger, which to me was very surprising. But they said they have very, very strong bookings for fourth quarter. So we will see how things proceed with the cruise lines. Next page, please. So container volumes have dropped at the Port of Baltimore, but not as significantly as we had originally anticipated. We thought we would see strong double-digit drops in volume. That hasn't happened. We have seen single-digit drops. One of the reasons that we haven't had a problem with the container volume as much as other ports is we have not received as many blank sailings as other terminals. Blank sailings is when the ship just cuts you out, doesn't show up. That causes a big disruption in flows of empties and flows of containers going back. But we have not had any blank sailings to speak of. While down in Savannah, I think they'll have, over the next couple of months, 50. So that blank sailings have been, no blank sailings here in Baltimore have been a real godsend for us. But there's a reason for that, is we don't have as many services as they do in New York and Savannah and some of the other, LA. But our numbers are holding. Now, all the factories in China have more or less reopened. Most are not at the full capacity. They also have problems with their supply sources. These factories open up, they require other factories to supply them components, and everybody has a problem with their supply chain. Supply chains right now are really a mess. It's not just in China, but other places that rely on China. I'll give you an example. It has nothing to do with container shipment, but it just shows you how one little piece of supply chain can really mess things up. We have a company in the United States that builds tractors. One of the things they use to build those tractors, they need a wire harness, electronic wire harness, to bring all the wires together. Comes from Mexico. Producer in Mexico, one of the parts of that wire harness comes from China. So the producer in Mexico didn't get the part. He can't supply the guy in the United States with the part. They're not putting some of their machines together. The supply chains in the U.S. and the world have gotten very complex over the last few years, and we're all seeing what's the result of it now. Anyway, the supply side of the business is up and running. There is some trucking capacity problem in China. Is bringing cargo to the port. That has become an issue just in the last couple of weeks. The big worry for us is the demand side of the business, U.S. consumer. Just like the U.S. consumer, we're watching the consumers and passengers on cruise lines. We've got to keep an eye on U.S. consumers in the market for all kinds of goods. If we don't start buying, if we don't start consuming, we'll have less business, less container business, less cruise business. And I'll get to it in a second too, less auto business. U.S. exports out of the U.S. have been very weak since before the crisis started, since the first of the year. Our exports are always weaker than our imports, and it has become a bigger issue now. Exports are very, very weak the last 2 months. Next page, please. So if you're looking at the maritime business as a whole, just to give you again, we're up at 50,000 foot level to look at the port. On the maritime side, ro-ro vessel owners are tying up ships everywhere. We've got 2 tied up at the Port of Baltimore. They're returning charter vessels. They're reducing the number of vessels in a rotation in an effort to keep vessels full. Specifically on the ro-ro side, almost every major auto plant in the world up until 2 weeks ago was shut down. So there were no factories producing cars until 2 weeks ago worldwide. It's a real challenge. Now most of them have started opening. They're all opened up again. Even the United States, they opened up on Monday. So all these plants are opening, mostly with one shift, and figuring out a way how to assemble a car with social distancing and all the other requirements. So capacity will take a while to get up and running. But the ro-ro lines are reducing the number of vessels in their rotations because they want to keep their vessels full. Right now at the port, we have quite a few cars in the port on import side, not going to dealers right now. Dealers don't want to take their cars because they're not sure if they can sell them yet. We are tiptoeing into a recession, I think, and people are very nervous about their jobs. We have a lot of unemployment going on right now. So there's not a lot of car buying going on right now. And what does that do? That keeps the cars from leaving the port. So we've got cars coming in, some going out, but not a lot. So we've got to see if we can stimulate that business as a country, stimulate the auto business again, and get some of these cars moving. On the export side, our exports have dried up. We haven't had exports for a while now on the auto side. One of the reasons is that plants are all shut. Today, Chrysler, GM, and Ford are back to work. Those are big exporters for us, so hopefully we'll see some of that business come back to us in the next 30, 40, 45 days. The container lines are doing the same thing. They're returning vessels. They're pushing for delay in new builds. Some vessel lines have as many as 80 ships on order right now, so you can imagine they're trying to either cancel them or renegotiate with them for better terms, but that's happening all over the place right now. They're trying to get these things changed in their purchasing plans. Most cases, they're unsuccessful in getting better terms. Most of these vessels may not be even produced, but container lines are also, everybody's returning ships or pushing for delay of new builds. Tankers. Now the tankers, talk about winners and losers. Right now on the ro-ro side, tying up ships and returning charters is not a winning strategy. Container lines, same thing. Tankers, they appear to be winning. Due to the fall in oil prices and the speed which it happened, oil kept flowing and there was no place to put it. Tanks all over the world were full. They didn't want any more oil. So the oil-producing countries started leasing tankers to put the oil in as floating storage, and they are charging monstrous prices. They're getting paid big bucks, more than $200,000 per day for some of these vessels. We expect this to be short-lived. We expect them to start winding it down in the next month or so. But in the meantime, they would be the winners in this maritime environment right now. Like I said, we expect that to be short-lived. So before we jump over to Lee, any questions? Or that's going to come at the end, I think. Okay. Thank you very much. Over to you, Lee.
Howard mentioned the logistics industry and the shipping industry is very much in a state of flux right now. And he highlighted many of the reasons, but I hope I can share with you some of the more specific situations that we are seeing. Our company, John S. Connor, is a freight forwarder, customs broker, and shipping agent. And so basically within those capacities, we help importers and exporters move their product from point A to point B, basically to and from anywhere around the world, to and from the U.S. So just to give you a picture of how we got to where we are today in this state of flux and how quickly it moved, I want to review in this first slide the timing of some of this activity and how difficult it has been to make adjustments no matter what segment of the logistics industry you're in. So in January, we had a relatively normal January, which was generally pretty good on the shipping side. Companies, importers and exporters are often preparing for a busy January in some sectors because we know that the Lunar New Year, the Chinese New Year is coming up, and that's a week-long celebration typically where China tends to shut down, and so people are preparing for that. This year was no different, except that right on top of the Lunar New Year celebration, the COVID-19 pandemic really started to hit and take hold and become visible around the world. So what that meant was one of the first actions the Chinese government took was they said, we're going to extend the Lunar New Year. So when factories shut down for that week celebration and workers traveled to their home villages to celebrate the New Year, it takes a week to 10 days for that to get started up again. Well, now the COVID-19 pandemic piled on top of that. And so those returns to the factory and the factory resuming were all delayed by government decree, similar to what we've had in this country in response to COVID-19. And that week-long extension became, in some cases, 2-week extensions. And as a result, the Chinese production stopped for a pretty extended period of time. So a lot of folks in the supply chain and the supply chains they rely on were not prepared for that. But the Chinese production really dropped late February, early March. And we actually had, interestingly enough, we had importing customers in the U.S. screaming at us, where is my freight? When can you make a booking? I need that product in China delivered as soon as possible. That would have been late February. And we had to explain the situation to them that your product was not available to ship. So we have to wait. Not very well received for supply chains that rely on just-in-time inventory in many cases. So about mid-March, as you know, the COVID virus hit the U.S. with intensity. Started in the state of Washington, moved to New York City pretty quickly after that, and became a serious problem. So the U.S. economy started to decline. Meanwhile, those importers who were screaming for their product just a couple weeks earlier were now had a change in attitude. We were starting to hear from our agents in China about bookings that could be made. Some factories were starting to get back to work in some parts of the country in China. And just 3 weeks after jumping up and down, waiting for their import cargo, some companies in the U.S. that we work for were saying, wait a minute, hold on. We might want to delay that order, or we might cancel that order, because they're starting to get concerned about what's happening in the U.S. economy with this virus. And so by April, our economy here was deteriorating substantially. And that's about when China was starting to ramp up in some cases. So you can see we saw how quickly the situation moved from the virus affecting Chinese production, moving across the world to Europe, and then moving to the U.S. And in just the space of a few weeks, the whole supply chain was turned upside down on its head. So, how were the carriers around the world responding to this situation? On the ocean freight side, as we mentioned, they were prepared for the Lunar New Year cuts. They were normal. Sometimes they have a few, as Rick described, blank sailings, which basically means a vessel would be taken out of the rotation and the sailing would be canceled. But with the continued reduced production in factories in February and early March, the shipping lines were having ships show up to load in Chinese ports with very little cargo to load. So they responded to that, and they have to right away by raising blank sailings to a level that has really been unprecedented. We've never seen this many blank sailings before. It actually was good strategy for the shipping lines because they can't make money if there's no cargo on those ships. They're better off laying them up than having them move around the world and burning fuel and not having cargo to load or discharge. And when they saw their vessels being utilized much less, they pretty quickly instituted this blank sailing program. I was hearing numbers for the month of March, somewhere around 45 to 50 sailings canceled. In April, it was even more increased to 65, 70 sailings canceled. So we know what that means when the sailings from China and Asia are canceled in March and April. That means there's going to be a reduced number of vessel calls at U.S. ports in May and June because of the transit times. So much less options for importers to book their cargo and receive it during that time frame, and much less options for U.S. exporters to load their cargo. Months of May and June are as predicted, going to be very difficult for our industry. But a smart thing for the ocean freight carriers to do to control their costs. So talk about air freight for a minute. Ocean freight was a big change. Excuse me. Are we on air freight? Everybody got that? Air freight was an even bigger change. So what people don't realize in many cases is that the air cargo market, which is a very important one and carries a lot of high value materials, carries perishable materials, carries delicate materials that can't withstand the handling so much that occurs in ocean freight shipments. But a large piece of that air freight is carried in the bellies of passenger airlines. So what's the first thing to happen when the COVID-19 virus hit all around the world, in our country and other countries? They right away canceled passenger flights. The governments refused to allow passengers from certain countries in, didn't want our people traveling to those countries. So the commercial airlines did the smart thing from a business standpoint and canceled a huge amount of passenger flights. But what that did was it reduced the capacity for air cargo substantially. In some cases 30, 40%, in some cases even higher. So as bad as the ocean freight reductions in blank sailings were, air freight was even much worse. In ocean freight, it's been a problem, but because of the downturn in U.S. economy, it's been appropriate. In air freight, although there has been a downturn in the economy that affected products that are typically moved by air freight, there was one significant change in variable that has occurred. As you all know, there was this huge worldwide demand for material to fight the COVID-19 virus. So that was personal protective equipment, that was medical supplies, testing equipment, and not only was there a huge demand, but it was urgent. As you know, hospitals were very concerned about having their emergency rooms and their intensive care units overwhelmed by the surge that was expected with all the coronaviruses that were occurring. And without those passenger airlines in service, the capacity was substantially reduced. So we had freighter capacity in air freight that was moved into that market, and a lot of airplanes were chartered to carry market material from China, where most of the PPE equipment is manufactured, and a lot of the medical supplies are manufactured. But that could not completely fill the big reduction from the passenger airlines. We have seen passenger airlines being converted to be able to carry more freight. In some cases, that means they're able to take the seats out of the planes and stow cargo in a normal manner. But in other cases, there was not time or really the ability to do that. So we just had passenger airlines operating planes and the FAA quickly providing new cargo requirements for how you secure and lash cargo inside passenger seats. And so we have passenger airlines that are filled to the brim in some cases with cartons in the passenger seats carrying cargo. So what has that meant? For air freight, because of the extremely limited capacity, rates have gone sky high. We're seeing air freight rates that are going up 3, 4, 5, even 6 times what the normal air freight charges would be. Not something that a lot of importers and exporters were counting on. In addition to that, even with those high rates, there simply was not enough capacity to keep anywhere near a normal transit time for air cargo. Typically, folks who want to move product by air cargo are used to a 2 or 3 or 4 day transit time at the most from Asia to the U.S. But now we've had backlogs in place because of the lack of capacity, which has stretched that time frame out even weeks in some cases. So, where are we now with these results? The volatility that Rick Powers described and what happened with the capacity for transportation has caused the problems I just mentioned. There's a lot of backlog. There's limited capacity with ocean freight. And it creates a lot of uncertainty for anyone involved in supporting a supply chain. You have to wait for a longer time for your cargo in some cases. You have to pay more than you'd like to. On the ocean freight side, the rates have gone up, but not that much. It's been a good thing for the carriers because the blank sailings have allowed the pricing to be stable in some respects with some modest increases. On the air freight side, as I mentioned, of course, the prices are much higher. But we've also seen, just in the last week or so, some indications of maybe the worm turning on some of this situation. We've had a couple of our agents in China come to us and indicate that we had a few export bookings out of China that were actually going to be rolled because of the blank sailings and the carriers not putting as many ships into service. We've actually had some export bookings where the ships arrived, but they were full. So we had to roll the bookings, and that means they are delayed for at least another week usually till another vessel comes along and has space to take those. We'd like to think that is a sign to be optimistic about, and that maybe demand is increasing somewhat in the U.S. in certain segments, and the factories in China are ramping up still further and getting production rolling better. Time will tell on that, and that's one of the big questions with the uncertainty. How deep will this downturn be? How much business will be impacted, and how long will it last? How long will the recovery be? So, what do you do in that situation? With where we are now, we are recommending to our customers, and we are doing this ourselves, we have to watch the carrier schedules very closely. Hopefully we'll see some of those blank sailings start to resume and have the more regular rotations occur, so we'll have more options. That's not certain right now because of the economic uncertainty in the U.S. We also are encouraging our customers to think about making early bookings to ensure that you can get space allocated, particularly on the air freight side. There's still huge problems on the air freight side with the continued demand of the medical devices and medical equipment and the PPE that's moved by air freight. We also, and this began even 2 years ago with the beginning of the trade war, we see more customers looking at trying to diversify their supply sources or diversify their markets in the case of exports to see if they can find other places to source their material or to ship their material. That's been going on for the last year and a half at least since the trade war. But this situation that we see with the pandemic has only exacerbated and raised the awareness how delicate our supply chain can be. But that's more of a long-term solution. It's not easy to change markets and change sources. But for the short term, we suggest booking early and consider adjusting your budget because the rates are going to be higher, particularly on the air freight side. So that's the current picture and how massive the supply chain challenges have become. The biggest question, as I mentioned, is the uncertainty as to how long this is going to last. We hope that the carriers will respond when demand picks up quickly, as quickly as they did when it went down. But in this political season, the often heard cliche of "it's the economy, stupid," is probably appropriate here. But there's a lot of disagreement and uncertainty as to when are things going to return to normal, and also what will that normal really be? Will there be another new normal after there was in the Great Recession 10 or 12 years ago? And are we looking at a long, slow recovery, or will there be something of a spike and a surge to supply the pent-up demand? Right now, that's still uncertain, but we can all have our fingers crossed. And if anyone out there has a crystal ball about that, please send me your predictions. I'd like to hear about them. I'm happy to take any questions at the end of the session here. But with that, I'll turn it over to Phil Grove, one of our important Baltimore exporters, Delicate Dredge.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Rick, and also thank you to my colleagues at the MAPIT Alliance. Good morning. I'm Philip Grove with Ellicott Dredges, and I work in an international sales capacity for Ellicott. And I'm also the chair of the Maryland, D.C. District Export Council. What I'm going to do here this morning is first introduce to you what we do at Ellicott Dredges, as far as our export programs in regards to logistics, and then towards the end I'll introduce to you what the Maryland DC deck is and what we do, because you've heard that term a few times throughout this webinar so far. So our company is quite old, and we are a manufacturer of dredging equipment, dredges themselves. You can see from this map that we've sent equipment, US-made equipment, in either our Baltimore or Wisconsin facility all over the world. I've also put together a listing here just to show you a little bit more specificity of where our equipment has gone and how different each shipment can be country-wise. With that, you're probably thinking, well, what is a dredge? So I'm going to introduce to you what we do here. And you can see in this photo a typical dredge that is dredging a waterway. And the most common use of our equipment is for dredging a navigable waterway, a river, a port, a harbor, somewhere where boat traffic needs to continue to reach, whether it's for commerce or for pleasure boating. Other common uses of our dredges are for mining and land reclamation, and mining is sort of straightforward. So there's something valuable underwater that needs to be extracted. And then land reclamation is where the land that is either a swamp or semi-swamp or wet also has value, and it needs to be developed and filled with material like sand that's in the local area. And I thought this was a really great picture to illustrate what a dredge is to this audience. You can see in the top of the photo there's a larger shipping channel, and what the dredge is doing is it's dredging into a channel and creating a channel that you can actually see that it's swept and cleaned already for boat traffic. That's what a dredge does. That's why we do what we do, is to get these type of jobs done. As I mentioned, we have two facilities in Baltimore, or one in Baltimore and one in New Richmond, Wisconsin, where we both facilities manufacture dredges full time. And what you may notice between both of these photos is that neither location is on the water. And we do produce equipment that has to float and be on the water. But the way we deal with that is that all dredges, regardless of where they're made, are designed to be transported by truck into pieces, truckable pieces. And the main reason for that being is that our major markets, as you saw on the map a few slides ago, are in developing and emerging markets, where there just isn't the infrastructure available like you have in this country to get equipment to a project site where that infrastructure needs to be developed. So our dredges typically break down into about 6 trucks or more to be shipped from our location to the project site. And shipment within North America, from within the U.S. or to Canada or Mexico is by truck only. But if we are going overseas, we do ship by ocean. And you will notice in these photos that none of our components fit within a standard ocean container. So we're typically shipping by break bulk carrier or project carrier, and then Rick sort of mentioned a few of those that do go out of the Port of Baltimore. So when a dredge is shipped in pieces, once it arrives at the port, it is loaded onto a break bulk vessel in parts. So you can see here there's a few different images of dredges and parts of dredges on different types of break bulk vessels. There's different types of break bulk vessels too. The far left vessel, you can see where the equipment's sort of in the belly of the ship, and you can see the water at the top here. And in the middle vessel, there's actually containers also on that vessel. And then the far right vessel was on deck, and that's a pretty cool shot of multiple dredges that we shipped a few years ago. But you can see every shipment is different for us, so we do have considerable planning for every deal. You may wonder that these pieces of the dredges aren't assembled, so the dredge isn't ready to work. So when they do arrive at their destination, they do have to be assembled, kind of like a giant-sized Lego kit. All sites of assembly are different, and in certain cases, we are responsible for this activity, for assembly. So this is part of our logistics planning and role. So sort of from left to right, you have sort of an ideal assembly location towards to the right of a less ideal assembly location where you don't have a port facility or cranes available. It's just dirt, and the slipway is made out of the environment there. So this is exactly why we ship in pieces, is because we want our equipment to be able to reach anywhere in the world. So as you can see, these are big pieces of equipment, and we have to consider a lot before we let a deal go through or let the equipment ship. So what I'm starting here now is some tips and some advice for those who are looking at exporting products. So when you're starting to consider a shipment overseas, this is sort of an order of things that you need to think about. And the first is whether or not your product requires any license or certification to export, and what compliance steps do you have to take to comply with U.S. government or federal regulations. And that usually applies to medical devices, food, or equipment, electronics that could be considered for military use. So you would have to get a certification or a license from the Department of Commerce to register your company and register your exports. Or, like dredges, we're fortunate, we are what's considered an EAR 99, which we don't have any specific licensing or certifications required to export. So it's something you need to think about before you send your products overseas. The next item to consider is your choice of mode of shipment. So as you saw in some of my photos, we ship through usually a combination of truck and ocean shipment. We do ship spare parts by air, and in the rare occasion, some dredges by air. But selecting the mode of shipment would be the next consideration you want to make. After that, you need to determine where the goods will leave the United States, where they will be exported from, which seaport or which airport. And as you heard from Rick earlier, the Port of Baltimore may not have as many problems as some of the other ports up and down the East Coast as far as blank sailings, but other ports which may have a vessel going direct to your destination may have been experiencing problems. So you do need to consider the routing of your goods, not just to get it out and export it, but also how it gets to the end user, so your customer is aware of the timing and when what you sold them is coming and going to arrive. And ocean vessels and air shipments, in particular, they're not much different than when you book a flight for a vacation or a business trip where you have layovers and stopovers. So you should be aware of those in advance too. The reason that's important, especially with ocean shipments, is that it's going to add time and most likely expense to your shipment. So picking an optimal routing is very much recommended. Sort of in conjunction with these steps, you also want to consider the terms of your sale. So the terms of sale are defined by Incoterms, and for those of you who are not familiar, Incoterms are internationally recognized set of rules that establish the responsibilities of sellers and buyers of goods and services in a international transaction. So describing where your responsibility starts and ends. And those go from the most basic to the most extreme responsibility. So the most basic is the Incoterm called Ex Works. which is basically your customer is going to come and pick up the product from your factory. And then the most extreme is delivered duty paid, which is basically what you saw in my photos, where we would ship it from Baltimore, put it on a ship, get it to the location, get it to the waterfront, put it together, and put it in the water. It's delivered, duty paid, all, you know, turnkey. So Incoterms describe everything in between. The Incoterms also typically define when you're going to get paid, which is very important to be aware of. But instead of going on and on about that, I'm going to share a link in the chat function that you can take a look at after the webinar to get to know a little bit more about Incoterms. It's a very interesting subject that you should totally be aware of. The next consideration that I recommend here is your export and shipping paperwork and how important that is. Going to be creating a set of paperwork that's going to be used for shipping the goods from your factory or from your location, getting it on a ship or on a plane, and once it arrives at its destination, getting through customs of that specific country. And customs clearance is different everywhere you go. But what's so critical is your paperwork, because that same set of documents is going to travel with your goods and get it to where it needs to go. And if your paperwork's good enough only for export purposes, it's not going to help it get through customs on the other end. So paperwork is very, very important. And also, I should add to that the markings on your cargo, on the boxes, and identifying your goods so they can get through the shipments cleanly. These are just some considerations you should make prior to your shipment. Now I wanted to just talk about some of the tips that add to this during this pandemic. You know, this is a temporary situation. We don't know how long it's going to last, but in any event, you should keep your business going. You should keep your sales process in motion, especially for international buyers. Customers overseas, like mine, are very relationship focused. They want to hear from you. They want to be comfortable with you as a supplier to them, as a seller to them, and they want to know that you're still doing well and that you guys are still friends and that business is going on as usual. So I highly recommend continuing your sales processes, and in the absence of travel, to stay communicating as much as possible. And we're fortunate that there are these technologies available, WhatsApp, FaceTime, chat, etc., that allow you to stay in touch, and I recommend you do that. I'm on WhatsApp more than ever and on FaceTime more than ever with customers than in the past, and just keeping those relationships going. And as I mentioned, using the technology available to replace those face-to-face meetings. And I know some of my colleagues are even doing virtual factory tours, so walking current or potential customers through the shop to show them as we're building something for them or something that they're interested in purchasing, and just showing them that the quality is there and the process continues. And as far as that goes, I mean, let your customers still know that you're there for them, that you're in business and you're going to be there for them when this is all over, and that you're there to support them. The next point I have is just to be diligent about your financing payment terms, especially for new deals and ongoing deals. It's not as easy as it was, but banks are willing to do business still. They're still competing with each other, but of course risks have increased. So keep looking, keep searching, and you can ask some of the people in the MAPIT Alliance for help if you need help with this. And then just as Lee said, don't expect shipments to be business as usual right now. Check and double check the port statuses. Right now the Port of Baltimore has, you've heard their update today, but that may change in a week. But that also counts for the shipment or the ports on the other end where your goods are arriving. And whether there's custom delays or backups with vessels, unloading, discharging cargo. And that relates to the next point which I have, which is to be aware of the terms of your booking. If you are shipping something out of Baltimore, it ships on time and it arrives at the port of destination, and there's a congestion at the port and there's lots of vessels backed up, and your booking only allows for 10 free days of waiting time, and then you have to wait another 10 days. Who's responsible for that? So be aware of the deals you're making and the terms, so you're not at risk. But the last point here is just hire a freight forwarder likely. They're experiencing these challenges day to day. Not like some exporters who are maybe exporting once a week, once a month, etc. But freight forwarders are experiencing this on the ground, minute by minute, and they can really help you and support you and guide you properly as the challenges change and either improve or get worse. So hiring a freight forwarder is highly recommended. And then my last slide here is that I just wanted to introduce to you the Maryland DC District Export Council, or the DEC, as it's been mentioned. The DEC here is, we have about 35 members, and we're one of over 60 DECs throughout the United States. All of our members are volunteers. They were appointed by the Secretary of Commerce of the Department of Commerce. Our mission is to basically support the growth of exports from Maryland and DC. And we do that through advice, education, assistance, and mentorship of current and potential Maryland and DC exporters. And we typically do that through a variety of events. Like this webinar would typically be in person, but we are doing this virtually for the time being. But we do also provide specific advice or mentorship if you reach us through our website, which is listed here on this page. The last point here is that we do have a signature event that we typically have annually called Export Tech. Export Tech is a program developed by NIST that's nationally recognized for supporting export-ready companies in their development of an export plan, a very detailed step-by-step. So you saw the wheel that Rebecca introduced earlier with the 9 steps. So that basically Export Tech is taking your business and applying that wheel to create a developed and well thought out export plan. So the final part of our mission here is to support the Department of Commerce and their local office. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen Fisher, who heads that office up.
Thanks, Phil and Rick and Lee and Rebecca, everybody, for your great presentations. Good morning, everybody. My name is Colleen Fisher. I'm the director of the Baltimore Export Assistance Center. We are part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we are the Federal Export Promotion Agency. So what we do, I'm the director of the Maryland-based team. There are 6 of us. We help companies export overseas. And, of course, that involves many facets. Along with our MAPIT partners at the University of Maryland Center for Global Business, the University of Maryland the Maryland Department of Commerce, and also along with the Maryland DC District Export Council, we all help companies with their international business and exports. And one slice of that, as we mentioned and are discussing on this webinar, is the export logistics and the shipping and freight forwarding aspect. So our team of 6 does a lot to help Maryland companies with all aspects of international business, but specific to this webinar and the export logistics, we provide trade counseling, which is all free to Maryland companies. And that trade counseling includes guidance on export documentation. A lot of our companies don't know what forms to fill out for different markets, whether it's a certificate of origin for Canada or Mexico, or a commercial invoice if that's required. And some other certificates of free sale that are often commonly requested in the Middle East. We also help our clients do landed cost calculations, and we often use third-party tools like those provided by freight forwarders like John S. Connor, UPS, FedEx. We also talk to our companies about what to consider when choosing your freight forwarder. Depending on the markets that you're going to and the type of product, some are better at maritime shipping, some are better at air freight. So we just talked to you about what to consider and what questions to ask so that you're making sure your freight forwarder is serving your interest and your customers overseas. Phil mentioned a bit about Incoterms. We help companies understand that and understand what terms to actually put on their documentation and just make sure that they understand the basics so they can ensure proper compliance even if they're using a freight forwarder. And then last, we talk a little bit about the export regulations and export pricing. Is your product priced correctly for that market? Should it be lower than the U.S. price, et cetera? We also will do due diligence reviews. If you are looking at a distributor overseas or a logistics partner, we can provide a service called the International Company Profile, which assesses if that distributor can actually do what they say they're going to do and have broad capabilities in a region that they might be saying, I can distribute throughout all of Europe. We can do some due diligence to see if they really have those capabilities. There is a fee for that service, but it's quite low. It starts as $150, so it's pretty simple. And we have teams across the world in over 100 cities and 70 countries. So we're able to utilize our team on the ground to get you that intelligence. And then last but not least, we use that overseas team that's set up in a network of embassies throughout the world to provide virtual services to you all. We can do matchmaking at this time. It looks a little bit different and sometimes it's delayed. But if you're having trouble finding some partners, or you need to find a new sales agent, given that COVID may have upset some of your relationships and supply chain, we can certainly do that in about 70 to 100 markets overseas. We can also look at your website and your e-commerce and digital marketing strategy at this time. So take a look at trade.gov/virtual-services to learn more about what we can do for you. And we certainly appreciate the content shared by our partners on this webinar, and we'll be happy to connect you with more of those or discuss some of the export logistics through our trade counseling services. And I will now turn it over to another great partner of ours, Jessica Reynolds, who is the Senior Director at the Maryland Department of Commerce's Office of International Investment and Trade. Thanks for your time.
Great. Thank you, Colleen. So our office at the Maryland Department of Commerce is responsible for 3 areas in supporting the state. That is increasing exports from the state of Maryland, attracting foreign businesses to the state to create jobs, and marketing Maryland internationally. So today I wanted to focus on what programs we have that may be applicable to you as exporters, and specifically, on the topic we're discussing today. So some of you may be familiar with our Export MD grant program. This is our flagship program, I guess you could say. And this provides up to $5,000 in reimbursement towards expenses for export marketing activities. So there is an upfront cost, but we're happy to provide that reimbursement for eligible companies. I've listed the qualifications here, and in order to allow time for questions, I won't go into detail on that. Happy to answer those one-on-one after the webinar or at the end. But I did want to point out that particularly with COVID-19, we have been able to expand some areas that have been covered in the past under specific caps, and that includes the shipping of marketing and sample products, as well as other areas such as website localization, digital marketing, etc. So while companies have used this program in the past primarily for travel, we are promoting and encouraging companies to consider applying for non-travel related activities, such as those listed in the eligible expenses here. There is a bit-by-bit process to apply. It's an online application, but we do accept applications the first of every month, and we would look for companies interested to apply to contact us a little bit in advance of doing the project, because there is a 1-month review period. So if you applied, for example, the 1st of June, you would be able to begin your activities the 1st of July. So just keep that in mind when looking at applying to this program. The last thing I wanted to mention is some of our smaller programs, let's say they don't get as much attention as the Export MD program, which is a funding program, but not less important. These are also important programs, which is the services offered by our 16 offices around the world. We can offer up to 20 hours of free assistance in those offices for market research or partner distributor searches, as well as other activities. We can work on a scope of work with you, and we're happy to provide that service as well. Those 16 offices are still working because they are in their local markets, so they are able to continue those activities even during lockdowns in different places. And then I also want to mention that we do reimburse 2/3 of the USIAC services, the ones that Colleen was mentioning. So any of those that have a fee, we can also provide a 2/3 reimbursement separately from the Export MD grant program. It's not application. You can just submit to us, let us know, and we'll get you forms to fill out for that reimbursement. And then finally, we do work also with the Center for Global Business at the Smith School to match businesses with student teams under normal times. And now they are working on some other programs. So I will pass the baton over to Rebecca Bellinger with the Center for Global Business. so that she can go over those programs in more detail.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica, and everyone for your words. I've introduced myself already, so I won't talk about myself. Instead, I'll introduce the center. The Center for Global Business at the Smith School at the University of Maryland, College Park is the hub and driver of global activity and programs at the school. We focus our activities on 5 main areas: school internationalization and partnerships, student programming, research thought leadership, faculty development, and most relevant for this audience this morning is capacity building in trade for business. And we are one of 15 nationally recognized centers and a recipient of the Title VI grant known as CIBE, or CYBER, which stands for the Centers for International Business Education and Research. And this grant supports all of our activities and expands our mission outside of campus. There are 3 resources I'll briefly mention here. The first is the Global Marketing Virtual Internship Program. If you have participated in any of the other MAPIT webinars that we've already held, you've heard me talk about this already. This is a new initiative to support companies and provide additional training and professional experience to students, all the while adapting to this new virtual environment, as most of us are remaining in stay-at-home orders. So some key elements before I move on is that this is an opportunity for you to work with a pair of interns this summer on your e-commerce marketing, website localization, social media outreach, etc. So if you are interested, tomorrow is the last day to apply. So please check out that website or contact me directly. Excuse me. The next opportunity that you have to work with us and with our students, Jessica mentioned, which is the Maryland Global Consulting Program. And unlike an internship, this is a consulting project-based opportunity, semester-long, to work with students. So this will match you with a team of students, graduate or undergraduate, who will work on a challenge or a specific question that you have under the supervision of a faculty member in the fall or the spring. And this is embedded within a course that teaches consulting as a practice to students. The reason that it fits here, we can do all sorts of things with this opportunity, everything from marketing to market assessment, market entry strategy, et cetera. But we have had companies approach us about working with students on finding distributors or working through supply chain content. So if you are interested in this and you're looking forward to the fall, please do get in contact with us. We are accepting applications through the Maryland Department of Commerce. And then we'll all work together as a team to help you scope that project. Finally, the last thing that I'll mention, again, to leave at least a couple of minutes for questions, is not an opportunity to work with students, but it is another resource that really does complement quite well the content that you've heard today. And it is a video, research-based global perspective on the topic of disruptions in the supply chain. It's offered by one of our very highly regarded faculty members here at Maryland Smith, Sandy Boyson. So Sandy's a well-known researcher and colleague in this area. He's worked for DoD on NIST projects, the World Bank, with the Department of Commerce Advisory Committee on supply chain competitiveness, et cetera. So I can go ahead and put into the chat some websites to help you link to all of these opportunities. And before I do that, I would like to get us started on some questions. So I hope you'll bear with us if we go over a little bit in time here. The first question that I have that I think I will direct to Lee is, how long does it typically take, or how difficult is it to change suppliers? And everyone will need to unmute themselves in order to respond.
That's a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer for you today, but I think it probably depends largely on an industry by industry segment that you may be in. It depends largely on the product itself and how available it is in other places around the world, either being produced or a market for its sale. So that can really vary industry by industry and product by product. Although I know folks that have tried to do it, it's not a short-term proposition, especially if you're looking to source product, because it takes time for a factory that maybe has the capability and be interested in producing the product you want, but then to establish what the specific specs are going to be to meet your quality control requirements. So it's very involved. It takes a good investment and a get to know you and travel to make sure that the producer is going to be producing what you want. And by the same token, if you're an exporter and looking to diversify your markets for sale, you really want to get to know your customer as well. So that's why they're not short-term propositions, but it can be done. And particularly with the trade war going on the last couple of years, it's being done on a reasonably sized scale.
Great, thank you. Another question that has come in is, do you see more supply chain changes taking place around the world, including in Europe? And Lee, would take that, or Rick, maybe that's something you want to address.
Well, supply chains seem to be evolving all the time. And Europe, particularly for us on the East Coast, it's still a major trading partner. The EU is a major source of supplies, but also a market for exports as well. But it's a continually evolving situation, it seems to me, and particularly as the developing countries develop more capacity for production, and we see it now with China, which is still a major producer for the world, but maybe not necessarily the low-cost producer anymore, because their middle class is growing and their standard of living is growing, and other developing countries are looking for opportunities to step in there. Vietnam is a noteworthy one. We've seen rising, just in the last couple of years.
Yeah, this is Rick. I totally agree with what Lee just said. Supply chains right now are fluid like they've never been before. People who have had very good supply chains going to China have diversified. Even before the trade war, even before the pandemic, there was a big march out of China because of the higher prices. They had higher cost of employment there and labor. So there's been a big march out of China down to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, over to India. So there's a lot going on as far as that goes. In Europe, same thing. I mean, everybody's got an eye on their supply chain right now, how to make it more fluid, to make sure that their suppliers are up to snuff. And they're also looking for a lot of redundancy. Can you imagine if you relied on one supplier for one component, and that factory is shut down because they had one person get COVID-19? So you've got to build a lot of redundancy into your supply chain these days as well.
And in the interest of time, we'll take one final question, which combines a couple that I've seen come in. So this is multiple parts here. Do you expect shipping volumes and the composition of goods shipped to return to what it was before the crisis? That's the first part. And the second part is, are you seeing any sign of what the future will be like in this regard? And maybe a sub-part of that is, what new conditions would have to be met to return to this new, to revert, I guess, to what it was before the pandemic, or reach a new plateau of normal? Lots of content there. Who wants to take it?
I'll start it off. This is Rick. Yeah, there's a lot of questions baked into that. Mm-hmm. Of course, we'd like to think once things stabilize and they get either a cure or a vaccine for this and things get normalized, we'll get right back on track building international trade. But there is a caveat there. There's a big march for nearshoring, bringing more production back to this hemisphere or back to this country. So I can't say what impact that will have on international trade going forward, but they'll have some impact because there is a big push for that. But until there's like a straight out, either we all get over it or a cure or a vaccine and people get back on normal track, I think it'll take a little while to get up to the numbers we had before. But we'll see. I could be wrong. Obviously, I could be wrong. We have short memories, and we could all forget about it and just get back to work this summer. It remains to be seen.
Lee, anything you want to add?
Not too much, really. I agree. It all depends on the economy, and it's very, very uncertain as to how deep this pain and how deep the damage to the economy is going to be. The longer it goes on, the deeper the damage. The more businesses that don't survive, then the longer recovery period is going to be. We in transportation logistics, we are considered an essential workers, part of critical infrastructure. but we are only going to be as busy as our customers who are shipping anything and everything you could think of. And it's a consumer-driven economy, they say. 70% of our economy is driven by consumers. So when are people going to start buying cars again? When are they going to start building houses again? When are they going to start doing this and that drives the economy, really? And then they'll be shipping materials.
This is Phil. I think I have a little bit of an answer for that too. Is that the things you keep hearing is that this crisis is both a demand and a supply side crisis coming. And so, I mean, companies in the U.S. I'm thinking about it from an exporter's point of view, is that companies in the U.S. will experience the pain or changes in different ways, but also it's another reason why exporting is an interesting business to be in, because there are certain countries that are structurally weak economically to get through this recession, and there'll be other countries that are structurally economically strong, and that there'll be new winners and losers after all of this. And that's what's kind of the fun thing about being an exporter, is that that yesterday's market is gone and tomorrow's market is there, and just being aware of these economic improvements and changes is something that it's really an interesting thing to keep an eye on, because that's what happened back in 2008, 2009, is that you saw, the Asian tigers and the booms of the Indias and the Southeast Asian countries, but there's other markets out there that will thrive after this, and we just don't know what they are yet. And perhaps it's in Africa, or maybe it's back in Asia or Latin America. We don't know. So that's what I have right there.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. There were a couple of other questions we didn't get to, but thankfully, if you do have additional questions, please go ahead and feel free to reach out to any of the panelists this morning. There are a couple of questions about postal service and some others around currency, economic impact, disruption, and we look forward to continuing the conversation outside of this webinar if you'd like to. So this is our end. Again, thank you everyone, speakers, participants, for joining us, the MAPIT Alliance, this morning. Please don't forget to take the survey in the pop-up window that will appear after you log off the webinar. And again, please do feel free to reach out to any of us if we didn't get to your question. And if you're having any challenges with getting your products or your samples out to your customers and your distributors abroad, we especially do want to hear from you so that we can help. So thank you again for tuning in.